Welcome to the debut webisode of CUPE Connects. I'm Laura Walton, President of the Ontario School Board Council of Unions and Chair of CUPE's Ontario School Board Sector. It is my pleasure to co-host our first of a series of online panels on important issues that CUPE members and everyday Ontarians are facing during our whole new world of living and working in a pandemic. Tonight, I'm joined by my co-host, Carrie Lynn Poole-Cotnam, Chair of CUPE Ontario's Social Service Sector, and an amazing panel to discuss When September Comes, Childcare and Returning to the Classroom, JK to 12.
Thanks, Laura. This week marks week 23 of living and working in the COVID-19 pandemic, and we find ourselves at a place with September fast approaching and the impact of returning to school and childcare as a front burner topic in households, in government, and in the media. Tonight, we're joined by an amazing panel to dig into the issues facing families and workers as the school year is ready to kick off. Tonight, we're joined by Dolly Begum. She is an Ontario NDP member of Provincial Parliament for Scarborough Southwest. She moved to Canada as a child with her parents, her younger brother, and has lived in Scarborough most of her life. She was elected to the Ontario Legislature in June 2018 and is the first Canadian of Bangladeshi origin to hold elected office at any level in Canada. At Queen's Park, Dolly is the official opposition critic for early learning and childcare and also serves as Deputy Whip. We're also joined by Carolyn Ferns, who is the Public Policy Coordinator at the Ontario Coalition for Better Childcare. Carolyn has a bachelor's and master's degree in early childhood studies. She is a member of the board of directors of both Childcare Now and the Childcare Resource and Research Unit. Carolyn is a childcare representative on the CUPE Ontario Social Service Worker Coordinating Committee and sits on the CUPE National Childcare Working Group and is a member of CUPE 2484.
We also have Nigel Barif, who is a community organizer, elementary teacher, and an executive officer with the Elementary Teachers of Toronto. Nigel is a board member of the Canadian Anti-Hate Network, board chair of the Urban Alliance on Race Relations, and a member of the Good Jobs for All Coalition. Nigel's activist work focuses on quality public education, good green jobs, and a more just society for all inside and outside the classroom. Also joining us is Romana Siddiqui. She was born and raised in Toronto to Pakistani immigrants, now a soccer mom to 3 young athletes. Romana has been involved in the school council for the past few years and most recently in community advocacy, and is passionate about social justice issues and speaking truth to power. Having been a stay-at-home parent for many years, she's finding her way in how best to use her voice to speak out about issues that affect her community, including being involved with the Ontario Parents Action Network, who have been a strong voice for demanding a better, safe September.
So let's jump in. We received more than 150 questions for our panel, and surely we will not be able to address them all, but we've grouped them into themes to try to cover the hot button issues. So Carolyn, let's start with you. With 3 days notice, the Ford Conservatives made the announcement that childcare centers across the province could open on Friday, June the 12th. CUPE Ontario, the Ontario Coalition for Better Childcare, and the Association for Early Childhood Educators called the initial plan half-baked. We're now more than 2 months since that announcement. What's the status of childcare centers reopening as many families are scrambling for September?
Well, that's a great question, Carrie Lynn. And the Ford government's plan was half-baked. I think it was Today's Parent called it a hot mess. And it really hasn't abated. It hasn't changed. It's still a hot mess now. So more than 2 months after the government said that childcare centers across the province could reopen, the latest figures that we got from the Ministry of Education is that only about half of Ontario's childcare centers are open right now. And then there's so much that we don't know. So we don't know how many have submitted plans to reopen soon. We don't know how many childcare centers have closed permanently already. Although we've heard anecdotally about childcare centers closing, just in the last couple of months, 2 college lab schools, both of which focused on outdoor education, which is the really sad part, have closed. And we expect that more have closed permanently across the province because the Ford government has failed to provide the necessary funding to keep childcare centers going during this. One of the other things that we don't know is what the enrollment is at childcare centers that have reopened, although we've heard that many of them are experiencing extremely low enrollment right now. And one of the things, so what's so frustrating about this is that, you know, CUPE, Ontario, the coalition, and our members and allies have been trying to, you know, raise the alarm about this for months, basically from the moment that the pandemic started and childcare centers were closed down. We said, listen, this changes things, you know, long term, because for a childcare center to remain financially viable, they have to have full enrollment, right? And they have to have high parent fees, and they have to pay early childhood educators a pretty low wage. That's how the childcare market has worked badly, but has sort of stumbled along for years. But the pandemic has thrown all of that out the window. We know that for health, like for safety's sake, we have to keep numbers low. Although the Ford government's trying to just say, go back to full capacity. We know that that's actually not safe. But to do that, it takes more funding, right? To be able to keep those groups small. We can't keep charging parents higher and higher fees to make up for the fact that it's now a more expensive service to run. And we can't continue to pay early child educators so little for a job which now has greater risk and responsibility, and frankly has been underpaid for years. So we've been trying to raise the alarm about this, to tell the Ford government that they need to invest in childcare, that it's necessary for social and economic recovery long term. And now, you know, we're staring down September and we're seeing childcare reopening, you know, interacting with school reopening. And, you know, the government has failed to even address issues such as before and after school childcare. What happens with those cohorts? How are we going to be minimizing cohort to cohort mixing in before and after school childcare? If the government had been proactive about that, we had months where we could have figured out how to repurpose existing indoor and outdoor public space, how we could have coordinated those programs better. All sorts of things were possible. So now I think is a time when we can all, you know, come together and really, you know, raise our voices together and say, you've presented a half-baked plan. It's a hot mess, and you need to do better, and we're going to demand better. So I think that starts to start things off, but we've got lots more to talk about.
Thanks so much, Carolyn. It definitely sounds like a crapshoot, and certainly on the front of everyone's minds. So Dolly, based on what Carolyn just described, which is nothing less than a disaster, what are you hearing about parents when it comes to childcare, and what's happening in the hallways of Queen's Park when it comes to childcare, as well as the connection between childcare and the school system that so many families rely on?
Well, thank you. And thank you, Laura and Carolyn, for the introduction, and wonderful to be here with Romana. Carolyn, of course, we've been on many panels together now about childcare, and of course, Nigel, the work that you're doing. Thank you all for the work that all of you are doing for childcare and our education system. It's been quite the I guess last few months in terms of the level of anxiety, the level of confusion. You know, just yesterday, myself and Andrea met with a few parents, educators in Scarborough Southwest. We had a press conference, and you know, we didn't really do a promo, and it was just people just showed up because they were so concerned about the state of our education system and the, I would say, half-baked again in terms of reopening of our schools. And of course, what's going to happen when schools open up, and how before and after school will work, as well as you know, the ongoing issues that we're facing in our childcare reopening, because clearly they didn't take all the recommendations or any of the recommendations that experts, advocates like the coalition, like the association, like all of yourselves have come forward with to the government. And we have relayed that message to the government, to the ministry, saying, here's what will work. Here are, you know, many of these recommendations, my colleague Marit Stiles put forward a motion in terms of what we really need right now before school reopening happens. There are a few steps that are essential in order to make sure that our children are safe. So it's obvious why parents are anxious, because they're not feeling that certainty, that assuredness that's necessary when it comes to their kids going back to care or the classroom. And the one piece, and obviously we're going to have more of a discussion on this. I think it's they have to really take in childcare as a big economic issue, which they're not. It always seems to be the afterthought for this government and for the previous governments we have seen, which is a huge problem. And I was hoping, and I'm still hoping, I'm an optimist, so I'm still hoping that they will wake up and seeing what we're seeing in terms of the US and from the federal government, from my federal NDP counterparts, as well as the push that the work that we're doing in terms of pushing the governments. I really hope that this time, this moment that we have right now, sort of harnessed, will put forward a real plan for childcare that's inclusive of what we need for women, what we need for our labor force, what we need for our economy. So I'll end here for now.
Thanks, Dolly. Nigel, let's turn it over to you. As the school year is ready to kick off, safety for both children and education workers has been dominating the media as well as kitchen table discussions in many households across the province. You had a seat at the Sick Kids consultation table to advance recommendations to the government. Based on your analysis of where we are today, where is this government and the school boards falling short when it comes to implementing those recommendations in order to ensure a safe September?
Thanks, Laura, for the question, and it's an honor to be with all of you here. Many of the CUPE workers take care of my 4-year-old, and daycare is such an important issue in our home, and that we're hoping that the government understands that also. So totally agree. Myself, I'm also a member of the Ontario Education Workers United, and one of my fellow members were education workers across the province that are fighting for social justice and certainly trying to push back against this government's ridiculous plan. Laura McCoy and myself had an opportunity to speak with and to give some feedback on the second report that came out from Sick Kids. As many of us, and many of you, all of us, saw the uproar about their first report that demonstrated that they didn't understand what the inside of a school building actually looks like, how important it is from having, from our custodians that take care of the buildings, from our office workers that take care of the offices, to our educational assistants that are so crucial to taking care of the children. And so we were able to really lay that out for them to understand there's a huge piece that you didn't address, and a huge equity piece that they were missing from the first one. So a lot of a lot of our feedback really came around helping them to understand the equity focus around making sure that we have a seamless day, that parents need to be able to drop their child off at a safe daycare so they can go into the school and then have aftercare. And we were glad to see that when that they did start to push hard on smaller class sizes in the second report. Laura and I even had to go as hard as saying, look, you're going to need the CEO, Ronald Cohn, to be full-throated and make a very clear statement that smaller class sizes is an important part of the whole COVID plan, that you can't socially distance inside a school building without there being smaller class sizes and cohorts. The other piece that, and there's still a huge gap, is the mental health and well-being piece. The ministry is only providing for 500 nurses across the province, which is when we have over 4,000 schools, it means that most schools will not have a nurse that's going to be there to be able to respond immediately to any issues that come out. So it's still very much of a concern that the school boards, especially the one I work for, the public school board, TDSB, still has not been put a plan that says that all class sizes are going to have a hard cap of 15 to make sure that we can properly socially distance. We talked about with the kids, the ventilation systems in most schools, and we have billions of dollars in backlog of repairs that need to happen in the school buildings, and that their report speaks to ventilation that needs to be also considered, and so that still remains a huge gap. We also had a chance to point out to the kids that busing is another issue that we're not paying attention to, right? When you have children that are being picked up from different schools and they're going to all go into a small tiny school bus and not from different schools, it also, that's a huge red flag that hasn't been dealt with. And then and the cleaning, so kids did try to come out a bit stronger around making sure that the proper resources to make sure schools can do the proper cleaning protocol. But yet again, we still see that school boards have not been given the resources, the money to be able to hire enough custodians and other types of specialized staff to be able to deal with that. And the other part within, it didn't speak to it as full-throatedly as I think it needed to, but definitely as, Ontario Education Workers United, and I'm sensing OPAN also, that we need to make sure that parents have all workers, period, have access to paid sick days. Because we know that if a parent doesn't have sick days and their child is sick, it makes it a very difficult decision that morning. Are they going to be able to drop off their child because they have to go into work? So those are the areas and the gaps that I still feel that are still there, that we have to make sure that we deal with the smaller class sizes, make sure that we're dealing with cleaning, that we have to pay attention to the busing issue, the ventilation, and paid sick days for parents. So I'm going to pause there because I'm really looking forward to hearing from the other panelists. Thank you.
Welcome to Zoom and my failure to unmute. Thanks so much, Nigel. And I just, Romana, Nigel really touched upon some of the key things that I think all of us have been talking about. But I want to hear from you as a parent of 3 children. Like so many across our province, difficult decisions about returning to the classroom or whether to enroll your children online, those decisions are in your immediate future. You've been involved in the Ontario Parents Action Network, who are demanding so much for a better, safe September, including an absolutely amazing demonstration that was done last week of Ford's COVID classroom on the lawn of Queen's Park, which for anyone who's a visual learner such as myself, it was an amazing display to really hit home what we're going to be looking at in just a few weeks. What are the demands being advanced by the network? And if you needed to provide this government a report card of how the province is doing with these demands, what would the report card say?
So thank you so much for inviting me, and thank you to my fellow panelists. A few of our points have already been covered by previous speakers, but so we have a list of demands that were collaborated on from my organization, the Ontario Parent Action Network that I'm a part of, as well as the Ontario Families for Public Education and Ontario Education Workers United. So we have a list of 9 demands. So 1, fully funded 5-day in-class learning with cohorts of 15 students. 2, funded, safe before and after school childcare. 3, safe buildings. We need increased funding for infrastructure repairs, PPE, the personal protective equipment, cleaning supplies, and the custodial staff. 4, funding for health and well-being, free food programs, and a nurse for every school, not one shared between 10 schools. Number 5, full student support. So we need more EAs, child and youth workers, learning and social support resources. 6 worker protections, 21 emergency paid sick days and full status for all workers. 7, anti-racism, police-free schools province-wide. We need to decolonize the curriculum. 8, equity, fund the elimination of systemic barriers to full student achievement. 9, housing security, province-wide ban on evictions, funded housing strategies. And if I needed to provide a report card today of how the government is doing with these demands right now, I'm really sad to say that our government is struggling. We need to improve. The government is failing us. So I can just maybe take a couple of minutes to elaborate a little bit more about the demands, but some of it, is, as I mentioned, has already been repeated. So we need to be spending the necessary investment. Right now, even with the additional funds that Minister Lecce has unlocked, we're still looking at about $1 a day per student. That's not enough to address the COVID health risks. So parents are being put in this position where they're being forced to choose between keeping their jobs, sending their children into dangerous learning environments. So it's not, you're between a rock and a hard place for a lot of people. As Carolyn had mentioned, there's a big issue of a lack of spots for childcare and before and after school. That's really needs to be worked out a little bit better to maintain those cohorts and that the social bubbles that we're going to need to help buffer us from a larger second wave. So talking about that reserve funding that's been unlocked, the suggestion was that, that money can be used to lease additional space or hire more teachers. But those reserves are actually rainy day funds, and they've already been, with many boards, that money was earmarked for pre-COVID expenses. So it's not really a new $500 million. So one of the other things the government has said about masking, that it's not mandatory for kindergarten to grade 3, but really elsewhere in Ontario, children above the 2+, it is mandatory. And just like we can toilet train children, we can sort of train younger children as well to maintain the proper masking and hand washing and hygiene resources. That's going to be pretty important because in elementary school, you have the board that I'm with, schools, the elementary level are from kindergarten to grade 5 and then grade 6 to 8 in middle school. Some boards, like for example, when we used to live in Kingston personally and in London, Ontario, our schools were from K to 8. So I don't quite understand about the slightly different approaches depending on the ages when they're sharing the same hallways, and it doesn't quite make sense. So that's also a little bit concerning. I just want to keep an eye on the time, so I think perhaps I can reflect back on a couple of the other points in a few minutes. But I just did want to mention before I give the floor back that today, Premier Doug Ford announced $25 million for 200 new OPP officers. That's really surprising to me, considering that parents and community members are struggling and quite concerned about this return to school, which is not really safe. I'm just speechless about that. So it would definitely be a failing grade for the government. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ramona. And it sounds like the Ontario Parents Action Network is doing amazing work in the community and certainly raising the voice for a safe September. We're going to move to a bit of like a round robin session. And as you all sit here today as educators, advocates, a member of the official opposition, and a parent, what are the most important, or what is the most important issue that must be addressed in order for you to have more confidence in a safer September? And if there is any action that folks who are watching this tonight could take to support this demand, please feel free to give it a plug so that everyone can get involved. So why don't we go to Carolyn first, and then we'll go through the others.
Sure. So it's a tough question because there's so many issues happening right now. But it all comes down to funding. When you mentioned just now, Ramona, that about the new announcement about funding for OPP officers, the childcare budget has not increased by $1. The Ford government has been relying entirely on federal programs for any increased costs to the sector, and hasn't increased the childcare budget since before COVID started. So that's the big one. And that's what would make possible having smaller group sizes rather than 30 before and after school children in before and after school childcare. That's what would make it 15. That's what would make it possible to use additional space, lease additional space. And that's what would make it possible to staff programs adequately, right? So it all comes back to the necessary funding to make this happen. So to put a plug as to how folks can get involved to make that happen, CUPE Ontario has developed, along with the Ontario Coalition for Better Childcare, a new lobby toolkit to support folks to advocate directly to their to their provincial politicians, to their MPPs on this issue. And it has everything that you would need to secure a meeting, to put forth the demands. It's exactly what we're recommending, and everything else that you would need to support finding other folks to get together with to have that kind of meeting. And I think that that's how we'll actually be able to make some change on this, because we just need everybody to come together, speaking with one voice, directly to their elected politicians, directly to their MPPs locally, so that they know that this is an issue they just can't ignore anymore.
Thanks for that, Carolyn. And we'll be sure to get the brand new lobby kit up on the CUPE Ontario website, as well as the Ontario Coalition for Better Childcare one. And the good news is that MPPs are all in their communities this summer because the legislature has been shut down. So there's many days of opportunity to make our voices heard. So Dolly, as an MPP, what do you think is the one hot burning issue that we need to focus on in order to have a safer September?
Mm-hmm. So yeah, well, I think Carolyn actually summed it up really well in terms of the asks we've had for childcare. One of the biggest things we've been asking for was the stabilization fund months and months ago. And I just want to give a little bit of a hopeful message in terms of, to all the folks who are watching, don't give up. Even if you leave 5 voicemails and sent emails, didn't hear back, don't give up, because what we have noticed in the past, and if you just kind of look back at the last few months ago, when the emergency childcare was announced, when they shut down all childcare spaces, there was nothing. And we had healthcare workers, we had essential workers saying, we need childcare. Otherwise, there's no way for us to stay home. And these are, those who are calling our heroes, who don't get paid enough, the ones who were, left behind and did not make enough. And right now they're still waiting for their pandemic pay in many of those places. It's those workers who needed childcare. And I remember myself and my colleague, the critic for education, both of us on the phone with the minister. And before that, it was Carolyn and I talking on the phone saying, what are some of the things we need as soon as possible? One was stabilization funding, and the other was emergency childcare. It took a little bit of time, but the minister did come forward and announce emergency childcare. But then what we noticed was that it wasn't available for a lot of folks who are essential workers. So then it took another few weeks, and I think after maybe 2 weeks or so later, we started getting more people who were in different municipalities able to join and take advantage of that. So once we kind of raised these issues and a lot of people started voicing their concerns, they did come up with some solutions. Clearly, there is a lot more left, especially with the funding needs, because a lot of centers closed. A lot of them right now that we're hearing from are still struggling. A lot of them who have opened up because of the cleaning and capacity issues. And actually, speaking of capacity, the other thing was repurposing space, which the coalition had recommended, and we had put in our letter asking for, there are different spaces across the province that you can utilize and make sure that there is enough space for children to distant, and you can have different bubbles, which are real solutions that we're giving to the minister. And if I were to move a little bit to the education component of it, there are a few things that we recommended, which included things like ventilation, for example. A lot of repair that we really need has to happen. Otherwise, these spaces are not safe. And it's really, I think it's disgraceful that right now we're hearing the government announce funding for things like ventilation. Right now, we're finally seeing them kind of walk back and say, oh, maybe we'll have a staggered opening because boards have to come up with solutions, which they're not approving if they don't like it. And what was even more shameful was seeing the minister and the premier come on screen almost every day. And then the time when they came forward and said, we're announcing funding, and it was federal funding that they're trying to take credit for. That is shameful. Not only are they not coming forward and stepping up for childcare for our education system, but trying to take credit for funding that you didn't introduce, that's another level of shamefulness. So there's quite a few things that they could do, and I think funding is one of them, and obviously steps to make sure that they repair the spaces properly, as well as the other thing I want to actually touch on, which I think Nigel pointed out, which was paid sick leave. And that was in the motion that we tabled in the House before the House adjourned, which is make sure that that there is paid sick leave for parents, because we know in just a few weeks now, days even, we're going to have a lot of parents who are going to be struggling and figuring out what to do. And yes, there's a large number of people who want to send their kids, but the reason is because they don't have a choice. These parents are not, happily sending their kids to school. They're worried that if they don't, they can't go to work. And so they're being forced to make a choice that's given to them. And that's the unfortunate part right now that we're facing. And we have a petition on my website that I'm happy to share for safe reopening of schools, which outlines all the things that we're calling on the government to do. That includes some of the things that I just talked about. So I'll be happy to share that as well.
Thanks so much, Dolly. Definitely some valid points. And just to springboard a smidgen off of the fact that the government is announcing money that isn't even their own spending. It is the federal government, just like they're announcing spending of opening up reserves. Like, that's old money. That's old stuff. That's not new stuff. With that said, Nigel, your turn. What is the most pressing issue as an educator returning to the classroom in September that you would like to see addressed?
Well, everything that Carolyn and Dolly has already said, and Ramona shared a list of demands from the Ontario Parent Action Network that I think are very important for all of us to consider and to support. So it's and it's hard with your question because we can't nail it down to just one thing. The health professionals have all said that social distancing must happen. So you have to address class size, and the government still has not done that in a real way. That we know that we need to have more resources, staff, custodial staff in school buildings to do the cleaning of high touch areas. Like, we don't have that already in place. And that the ventilation systems in many of these old buildings, I get to go around to many of the schools. We know that we have schools, we have portables where the windows don't open, right? We're not allowed to bring in fans or anything like that. So that means, we're not actually following what the public health has told us. And so if we have to deal with those things. And Dolly again made the important point that the NDP has already brought up in the parliament, that's saying that we have to have paid sick leave for all workers. right? Like I know that as a parent, that if I don't have a sick day, then I'm gonna, I mean, we know as educators that many times parents just happen to drop their kid off and you're like, they're sick and they must have been sick that morning, right? But it's because they had to go to work. And and for this government to announce, the $20 million for 200 new police officers, right? To take it, I think, what's happening is that cynicalness, right? Yeah, there's been a lot of shootings here in Toronto, and it's very upsetting, and it's happening in the very same neighborhoods where we have high COVID outbreaks also, right? But using the public fear about having more crime, right, to like then say it's okay, here's $20 million, when we know that the stats demonstrate that crime continues to go down, crime continues to stay where it was even over a year ago. And I just feel like it demonstrates the misogyny that we're dealing with, right? That you find the money to give these men, police officers, millions of dollars, but yet you can't find money for education workers, 80% of which at least are women. It is disgusting. And so I agree that, with what Dolly said, that we have to continue to have hope. That's why, working as part of the Ontario Educator Net, Workers United, and please visit our website, Ontario Education Workers United. We have a toolkit for all education workers. So it doesn't matter whether you're a teacher, you're an EA, you are custodial staff, you work in the office, it's a way for us to organize ourselves in the building. We have to do that. We have to break down these silos. I mean, I'll tell you, as a school teacher, I know that the custodian and the office assistant are my two best friends anyway, but don't tell that to anybody. But we have to work together inside the school to deal with the issues, and we're going to have to hold the government accountable. They say that there's social distancing. Well, let's show them that there's not. They say that we need ventilation. Well, let's show them that their ventilation systems haven't been fixed in almost 20 years. And so you'll see on our Facebook page, we've got a COVID checklist that you can use within your schools to go around to see here's what public health said, and here's what's happening in my school. So you can see what the issues are that we need to bring to the attention. So I do have hope. I saw when we all came together, education workers, when parents, when students came together, when they did that thing with sex ed curriculum, you remember? And we pushed back, and we found a way to make them capitulate. And we know that we can do this. We saw that even with CUPE workers, when you were going through your collective agreement bargaining with the government, and that when the community came out and supported, we saw them break down. When we pressure this government, they will back down. So let's continue to work together. Let's build together. We can push this government back and make them do the right thing.
Thanks for that, Nigel. Always good to round up on we can fight back and we can win. Romana, what about out of the 9 demands? I know how difficult it must be to choose one, and it is a tough question, but I'm sure you'll find a way around it. What's your response to this one?
Honestly, we need better funding. So estimates have shown that we need like upwards of $8 per student per day to be spent by this government to have a safe return to school in September. And that safe return impacts our entire community. That is really essential to minimize a second wave. We know the medical community is preparing to have a second wave in the fall. Mathematical modeling has told us that there will be. So how do we mitigate the effects of that? We need to be investing in having a safer return. So having the smaller class cohorts, having better physical distancing, having better ventilation, all of that is going to impact and affect and feed into having a more mitigated impact of this second wave. We need to have a safer return to school. Otherwise, parents are going to figure out other options, whether it's pod learning or just keeping their children at home in distance learning. So we need to have that money invested to ensure that we have adequate staffing, the cleaning supplies, the PPE, the ventilation. So unfortunately, it's not just a one issue answer.
Thanks, Ramona, and thank you, all of you, for putting into words what I think so many of us are feeling, both at home and in our workplaces. And we have a lot of CUPE education and childcare workers that have joined us tonight. And I think I'm not telling tales out of school, so to speak, but the anxiety amongst workers, both in childcare and in education, is probably at an all-time high. And the fear of the unknown is the greatest. These workers are preparing to go back. They are ready. They miss their students. They miss their children. So question for you, what is the message that you would like them to take with them as they prepare to go back to school? And I will say that some of our folks are already back. Our custodians have never left the building. Our childcare workers, many of them have worked all the way through this pandemic. We have office folks that are returning. IT people have done some heroic things to get equipment into children's hands. What is the message as the school bell rings to kick off the 2020-2021 school year, be that in childcare or be that in schools? What's the message you would like them to take with them as they head back? Carolyn, we'll turn it to you.
Sure, thank you. Thanks, Laura. I think that, you're right, that anxiety is at an all-time high. What I can share from the childcare community, from those folks that, as you said, never stopped working in the classroom. I think many people were working, even if they were at home, but for folks that were working in program, yes, we had childcare workers, early childhood educators working in emergency childcare centers. Licensed home childcare never closed as well. And what we've heard from those folks is that, yes, there's anxiety. Yes, there's much more cleaning and screening and all of the protocols that are required. But the work is incredibly rewarding, just as it always has been. And they did miss the children, and they did miss doing their work and practicing their profession. So that holds a little bit of hope. But the other thing, and I think this is perhaps the most important thing, is even as this goes forward, to not forget that we're going to keep fighting for you. We're going to keep fighting for what's needed. This is personal for people. I've worked on childcare issues for years, but I had to make the decision in July to send my son back to childcare myself. And it was anxiety producing. And, I shared, I would have hugged the ECs if I could have, but, we shared a sort of look. And I realized that this was something that, we were going to take forward. There's no way we're going to take no for an answer on this. We're going to keep fighting for what's needed. We're going to keep fighting for the money that's needed, because our community, education workers, childcare workers, we have the solutions. The coalition and CUPE and the association put out a report with 37 recommendations at this point on exactly what needs to happen to have a successful childcare system and early learning and childcare system for reopening and recovery. What we need is the government to fund it. But our community is strong, we have the solutions, and we're not going to give up.
That's awesome, Carolyn. Thank you. Dolly, what about from you? A message to the folks?
Well, that was so powerful. I just want to echo some of the things that Carolyn said and add that these people, the educators, these custodians, what we are, another part of what's happening right now is these kids who have been away from these spaces for a very long time are going through, not just the care or the education part of it, but there's a mental health part of that as well. And as I'm thinking about mental health, I'm getting really angry about the funding that was just announced today, and the fact that the government just ignored like the Black, Indigenous, racialized, all the community members who have called for mental health funding and many other needs that in our communities, but instead decided to go ahead and give millions of dollars to the OPP. But putting that aside, I think what these educators do, and the fact that you're putting yourselves at risk and helping our next generation become who they are and educating them and taking care of them, honestly, just from the bottom of my heart and from my caucus and from a lot of the people that I talk to, I can say thank you to each and every. I think there's about 500 people that's joined us today. So just a thank you to all of you who are doing this work, because it's truly remarkable. And yes, the government needs to do much more, and it's unfortunate that we're dealing with a government like this right now. But we have to keep fighting this fight, and I will continue to do the work that I am doing, and I will continue to fight for you, that you can count on, and we'll make sure that we push this government to do the right thing, because right now their priorities, I think, are really mixed up, and we have to make sure that they put the right things like education, like childcare on top of that list. So don't give up. Let's keep fighting this good fight.
Thank you so much, Dolly. I'm going to hand it over to Romana as we're preparing to head back and your children are preparing to head back. What are some of the messages for childcare workers and education workers?
So when I say that the government needs to fund more staffing, it's not just the teachers and the educators in the classroom. We need more funding for the custodians, support staff, educational assistants, the ECEs, etc. I know sometimes that CUPE workers can feel a little bit left out, particularly when you've got these other 4 larger unions that there's been a lot of rallying around. But the parents that I have spoken with, we want the CUPE workers to know that we are with you. For all of us must be safe, or none of us are going to be safe. So I would strongly recommend to everyone that whether they're a CUPE member or not, or just a parent, we need to continue rallying. We need to contact our school boards, our trustees, our politicians, whether they're our federal or provincial or municipal politicians. We have to keep voicing our concerns. We have to tell them what we want done. There has to be a mass mobilization to ensure the safety for all of our public, the children, the workers. All Ontarians have to be part of this fight. It's particularly important for those who have the privilege of having a loud voice. This is a fight for our entire community.
Thank you, Romana. And, we've heard some great messages of solidarity and determination and grit to continue the fight. Nigel, what do you have to say to the folks that are preparing to head back?
Yeah, I feel like it's all been said already. But I just feel that, that the government is trying to reopen this economy on the cheap, right? Like everyone wants to return to the schools. We all do. I want my 4-year-old to go back to school, and many of the education workers, whether it's teachers, custodial staff, our office assistants, everybody wants the schools to be reopened, but we want it done safely. And that is a theme that we all share together. And I think that that's what we all have to use, as together we're going to fight for this, and that we're going to say, we know that it's $8 per child to do this. That's the investment that we need to be done right now. And I think we don't have to look too far in our history, right, of Canada. We have, in Canada, we had the suffragettes movement when women couldn't vote. We had and civil rights movements when, when Black folk were always being oppressed right up until now. And I think that this is our moment of reckoning, where we as childcare workers, as education workers, as parents and as students, that if we in the next 2 weeks come together and absolutely make sure that this government knows that if you don't fund this return to school properly, you will not be running this government in 2022. Like, this has to be it. Like, this is the example, right? This is how they treat women. This is how they treat Black people and Indigenous people. This is how they treat people with disabilities. It is this moment that we have to come together to push back and say, either fund this return to school properly, or you will not be in power in 2 years.
Well, that's a message that certainly hits home with me. And I want to take this opportunity and thank our panelists Carolyn, Dolly, Nigel, Romana for joining Laura and I for our debut CUPE Connects webisode. And to the 700 people who are watching on Zoom and on Facebook Live, thank you so much for joining us. We are going to be doing this series, we hope, every 2 weeks. And the next CUPE Connects is going to be health, safety, and COVID-19 for the week of August 31st, co-produced between Brittany and Tiffany from the CUPE Ontario Executive Board. So we hope that you'll join us and that you like this format.
Thanks everyone for helping us, joining us, and having us kick off our brand new project. I want to wish everyone a very safe and very healthy good night. Take care.
Thank you.